today about Tsavo. Now, not Tsavo the way you know us. If you've seen our buildings, that's good. If you've lived in our apartments, that's good. If you've invested with us, that's good. But Tsavo is just not that. We are the bold who change the world. We have bold characters. We have bold Tsavorites who go beyond the measures of what is proven to be possible. And so you have seen the life of Tsavo. The last 8 years, we have shaken the world of real estate. We have gone into the market and just, made what seemed impossible possible. We have brought affordable investments here in Kenya. From as little as 30,000 a month, you can actually own an apartment within Nairobi. Who thought that could be possible? I mean, growing up, we all knew real estate ni ya wale wa juu. Sisi tunajenga ka home ownership. And so we have made that possible. We have shown you that lifestyle can be a different perspective, that you're just not letting into our apartments, but you're getting into a community where you will become something great. And of course, when we start this journey of being great and being bold who change the world, we want you to be part of it. As we celebrate these 8 years of existence, we want you to be part of it. We want you to shake the boundaries and actually make things greater by being bold, and be the bold who change the world. I am Martha Inyuma, and we are the bold who change the world.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for everyone who's joining us tonight. We'd like to begin the webinar for tonight, but first, before we go any further, we'd like to begin with a word of prayer, and we can pray. Our dear Heavenly Father, we come to you this evening. We want to say thank you for the gift of life, and thank you for the opportunity that you provided to us, that as we begin speaking to your good people, and as we begin to impart knowledge and information, that you will be with us, and you will be the guider of this conversation. Lord, take care of us, and at the end of it all, we will gladly say thank you to you. For it is in Christ's name we pray, trusting and believing. Amen. Amen. It's that time of the year again. It's just past half year. July has just come in, and you're seeing the two of us here, so you know what we're here to talk about. I'll let Winnie introduce herself before we go any further into the webinar.
Thank you so much, Karen, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen who are following us online. My name is Winnie Mwangoi Karuga. I am a tax lawyer and a partner within the firm of Mark & Partners Advocates, and we're here to discuss matters tax. We were last year around this time, and I think with the court process in the current Finance Act, this webinar has been delayed, but this is we are here today, and we hope to have an interactive session and make it worth your time.
Yeah, so I'm sure you have a lot of questions about what has been happening. Is it an act? Is it a bill? Is it supposed to begin 1st of July or the 28th of July? So any questions that you have regarding whatever has been going on, we are welcome to answer them. And I think while we were preparing for the webinar, we just have been looking at how Kenya has been within the past year and the things that have been affecting us. I think here at Tsavo, while learning our culture, one of the habits we learn in 7 Habits of Highly Effective People is the habit of choice. And we learn that there are things that are within your circle of influence and those that are within your circle of concern. So within your circle of concern, these are things that you cannot change. You need to plan for, but you cannot change them. I think when you now go to the economic side, they call them macroeconomic factors that affect us. For us in Kenya, this has been things like the Ukraine war, the depreciating shilling, the high inflation rates within the market. All these things have been things that have been reducing the basket that you have, reducing the money that you take home as disposable income that you would otherwise put into investments. So I think for the past, when was the bill proposed?
The bill process began in April. Yeah. And the act came into place on the 26th of June.
Yeah. So contrary to like the other years where by 1st of July we would actually have a Finance Act in play in the economy. So for this year, the bill has had a lot of issues. We've been in court for a while now, and now it's no longer a bill, it's an act. And I think maybe you can just do like a highlight of how these and yeah.
Okay, so as Karen talks about the circle of influence and circle of concern, and she mentions that the circle of concern is that which affects you but you can't change, you just have to adjust accordingly. One of them is taxes. One very famous man, Benjamin Franklin, says there are only two things that are certain in life: death and taxes. And we always say it's unfortunate that taxes are compared to death, but hey, it's a reality. You are taxed from when you're born to when you die, and every year we see the lawmaking process of the Finance Act, which is an act that affects the administration and collection of taxes. And as we know and understand taxes, it's one of the main sources of government revenue. So interestingly, this year, I think as practitioners, we just love the way the public has come out so strongly in the public participation process of the finance bill making process into law. And the committee that was sitting, the National Assembly Committee that was sitting at Garden Inn Hilton along Mombasa Road, they sat on for hours on hours, and they were there diligently listening to public participation, and they did not lock anyone out. Even on Saturdays and Sundays, they would sit to hear public opinion. And even the National Assembly confirmed that this has been the highly contested and participated Finance Act, because they received more than 1,000 submissions, interestingly. Yeah. So finally, of course, in the entire bill making process, there were a lot of proposals in the bill that were really fought against. Some were dropped, some saw the light of day into the Finance Act, and we all know how political and emotive the Finance Act 2023 has been. So on 26th June, the President assented to it as law. And on the same day, our very famous Busia Senator, Okiya Omtata, went to court and filed a constitutional petition challenging the constitutionality of the Finance Act, and also saying that it's contrary to the Public Finance Management Act, because it didn't go through, certain provisions of the bill didn't go through Senate. And that was it. So ordinarily, when the Finance Act comes into place, we normally have commencement dates. So it will touch on the Income Tax Act, the VAT Act, the Excise Duty Act, the Tax Procedures Act, the Tax Appeals Tribunals Act, and also other acts like the Employment Act, the Capital Markets Act, the Special Economic Zones Act. So you'd find, besides tax statutes, there are also other laws that changes will be made in them through the Finance Act. So for the tax statutes, most of the provisions normally come into force 1st of July, and then there are those that are staggered into 1st of September, and those that are staggered into the new year, 1st of January, the following year. So when the President assents the law on 26th June, the expectation is 1st of July, we are collecting the taxes. So the Senator went to High Court and filed a constitutional petition. And on 10th June, the presiding judge issued orders, conservatory orders. When a conservatory order is issued by court, it means that we are staying the implementation. So that means provisions of the Finance Act that were to come into force on 1st of July, they are stayed. From a legal term, we say they are stayed to mean they will not be enforceable. So interestingly, as we all are aware, one of the very hot amendments of the Finance Act is the introduction of the VAT on petroleum products, where VAT on fuel changed from 8% to 16%. And on the midnight of 30th June, as we were busy filing tax returns, EPRA issued revised rates to factor in the new VAT rates. And effective from midnight of 1st July, those who fueled petrol stations hiked the price because the pump prices went up because of 16%. And when the conservatory orders were issued on 10th of July, then the question became, what happens to the fuel, the incremental 8% that the Revenue Authority has collected. So that's the journey. And when the conservatory orders were issued, then we had the cabinet secretary for national planning and treasury, and the Attorney General moved to Court of Appeal to seek the Court of Appeal to lift the orders of the High Court. So you know the way courts are ranked, so High Court, Court of Appeal, Supreme Court. So they moved to a higher court to seek that the orders are lifted. And on 28th July, the Court of Appeal issued orders lifting the conservatory orders. Again, that threw a curveball because in the Finance Act, there were certain Employment Act changes and payroll changes that normally happen end of the month, which will fall due payable 9th of the following month. So for most people who are employed by 29th, between 29th and 30th, you have received your salary. Those who are lucky to be in banks, by 25th, 24th, you are paid. So by the time the conservatory orders were being lifted by the Court of Appeal on 28th of July, most people had been paid. And again, we know one of the very, very highly contested aspects of this Finance Act is the Affordable Housing Levy and the changes in PAYE bans. So again, a curveball was thrown at the public and employers and employees alike, because salaries had been made without the correct deductions being deducted. And those who are conservative enough probably deducted and did not remit. But majority of the public relied on the conservatory orders and no deductions were made. So people received their salaries as usual. Well, so then the Busia senator again went to the Supreme Court to seek that the Court of Appeal orders should be lifted and that the stay is put in place. And of course, what they are saying, his main argument is, besides the the legal and technical argument of whether the Finance Act followed due process and observed all other laws like the Public Finance and Management Act that it should, his argument is the public stands to lose if those taxes are collected and yet they're held unconstitutional. So he's filed an application at the Supreme Court, and we have not had any pronouncement of it yet. But meanwhile, the main suit, which was the unconstitutionality of the Finance Act, is yet to be heard and determined. And Her Lordship, the Chief Justice, formed a 3-bench judge led by Justice Majanja, who are meant to hear and determine the suit, the substantive of whether the Finance Act is constitutional or not. Ordinarily, the court process can take anywhere between 1 month, 3 months to even 6 months before such a matter is heard and determined. So we are looking at probably the end of this year or early next year, or if we are lucky, earlier, until when we'll know whether the position of the court with regards to the Finance Act. But as you are aware, as you have seen a couple of public notices go out with respect to taxes that were to fall to commence from 1st of July, the KRS position is they're due and collectible. So that has been the journey of this year's Finance Act, and we must say it has been exciting, interesting, and quite peculiar.
All right. I'd like to recognize a few people who've joined us. I think Andrew, thank you for sharing your fire emojis. I see Koi Karuga with us, Eva Omondi, Elizabeth Gatwiri, Fidel Mwaki, Tom, Owino Jonathan, Kena Shimosi is here with us, Fanuel Mwakima, Mary Adung, Frida Mwasingo, Cynthia Cheruto, Evans Musomi. Thank you all for joining us. Please drop your fire emojis once you join, and feel free to ask any questions that you have. I think we've brought an expert here so that you're able to ask all the questions that you have or that have been. Yes. Yeah. So I think you've talked. We've talked a lot about how the bill has affected the economy at large, and a few highlights here and there about the individual person. So I, as an individual who is under employment, you've talked about PAYE and the affordable housing levy. What do those amounts look like? What do those percentages look like? What does that decrease in disposable income look like for each individual?
Okay. When the budget was read out this year, the national budget for the country sits at 3.6 trillion. And of course, when there has been a lot of traction in terms of revenue collection, and KRA recorded an all-time high this year in June, where they collected 220.6 billion in the month of June only. So just to paint a picture is, in the last 1 year, KRA has been very aggressive in government collection, in terms of revenue collection, in terms of desktop audits, field audits, compliance checks, and also a lot of the legislative changes that we have seen, like what we called a tax invoice management system, then it moved to electronic tax invoice management system. It's just to tighten the nose here and there in terms of revenue administration and collection. And as we know, the government needs money. The government needs to be funded to meet its social obligations. So there's a lot of aggression coming from the Revenue Authority. And that just trickles down also into policy. A lot of new tax, a lot of there's a saying that pesa hailali nje. So part of the new laws that have been introduced is that taxes should be paid within 5 working days, some taxes, and some even real time, actually within 24 hours, like the betting sector, taxes need to be paid within 24 hours. So all that just puts pressure, increases the pressure on Wanjiko in terms of how much the government is expecting to collect from us. So as part of its measures to just bolster up revenue, we've seen changes in PAYE bands. So our highest band has always been 30. Now we have 32.5 for those earning more than 500,000, between 500 to 800,000 a month, and then those who are lucky few who earn 800,000 and above, it's now gone to 35%. We have seen the highly contested affordable housing levy, which was introduced by the Finance Act. Previously, just to discuss it briefly, previously in the bill, the proposal was that it's going to be 1.5 capped at 5,000. And there was also a mechanism and a framework of how the funds will be used. It will be a savings kitty where you can opt in to buy a house from the government, or you will be refunded in 7 years. And then when the bill was assented into the act, the provisions were really reduced, and it became 1.5 employer to be matched up by the employee to be matched up by the employer, and there's no cap now. There's no cap at 5,000. So for those who are in the higher income bands, the argument was that it has to be equal, so that whoever is earning less can contribute a measurable amount for stability, and whoever is earning more contribute more based on your earnings. It's on gross earnings, and it's deducted at source, like the other statutory obligations like PAYE, and it's paid to the Revenue Authority as the collecting agent on behalf of the Ministry of Lands and Planning, and it's paid, the act reads, by the 9th working day of the following month. So that's how it is administered. It has a penalty to it of 2% for failure to comply. And the penalty is, of course, on the employer. So then the burden of compliance is just shifted to the employer. So those who did not remit it by 9th, then the penalty will fall due of 2%. So that is how it's administered. So that's one of the taxes that was increased. Another tax that was increased, and it's highly contested, is the issue around VAT. So there was a reprieve for VAT on LPG, which was now zero rated, but for petroleum products, it went up from 8% to 16%. And we all appreciate how reliant as an economy we are to, you know, petroleum products. It's a core factor in manufacturing. It's used everywhere, literally. From the time manufacturing begins to the time that product gets to the shelf, to the time it gets to your house, there's all this value addition, and petroleum is used, is applied. So that just changes the cost of living automatically. So there's now VAT on petroleum products at 16%. And then from an excise duty perspective, various excise duty rates changed here and there. Just to mention that now excise duty on money transfer from both banks and mobile money, cellular companies and national payment system, it has now been regularized to 15%. Like for banks it was 20, it has come to 15. For cellular it was 12.5, it's now going to 15. So we are all now at 15. So for any money transfer from bank, at least that has reduced, but for cellular phones, it has gone up. So your M-Pesa charges will go up because of that. And then, of course, there are all these new taxes that have also been introduced, like excise duty on a couple of imports. So imported furniture, imported cement, imported paints. Then we have what was introduced also in the Miscellaneous Fees and Levies Act, called Export Promotion Levy, and the idea behind that is to promote local industries. So if you're going to import certain products, which ideally you can source locally, there is a levy to it that is 17.5 on a couple of construction materials. So it's really been a raft of changes, but the main one that affects Mwananchi, I can say, is VAT, of course, on petroleum products, and then the changes in excise duty on a couple of issues, goods and services, and the payroll taxes, which now directly just hits to the majority of us.
Everyone.
Yeah.
I think just as we began the webinar, we are talking about things that are not within our circles of concern, things that we really can't change. But it's good to plan for them, like to know, understand, so that you see what does tomorrow look like. So that's on an individual basis. Let's go a bit deeper, and now that we're in the real estate space, and most of the people that we're speaking with in our audience are investing in real estate, what does this bill look like for those of us who are in real estate?
Okay. So this year, the changes in real estate weren't much. Some of them, of course, will directly affect the cost of construction, and we'll see how that just changes the pricing equation. And some of them are good news here and there, we can say. So from a real estate perspective, the changes in the act that directly will affect, say, investors is, number one, your disposable income, of course, as we can see, is already being eaten into by taxes. And I also forgot to mention NHIF. There's a bill in Parliament where NHIF rates is going to move from, currently I think the lowest is 150 and the highest is 1700. So it's going to move to a standard 2.75%. So anyone earning like 100,000, your NHIF contribution is going to be 2,750. So already that again just eats up into your take home. So even as players in the real estate, whether developer or investors, the disposable income is just a major shift. From taxes, in the perspective of taxes, then we have your excise duty that has been introduced on certain aspects of production. So we saw a while back, I think almost a year ago, the price of cement really went up. Most bags of cement would retail at around 550, 600 a bag, and it just shot up. And one, there was scarcity. Two, it went up to like 1,000 shillings. And vibe in the industry was that we don't have clinker. We don't have clinker in Kenya. So interestingly, this Finance Act actually imposes excise duty on imported cement at 10% of the customs value, or 1.5 per kilogram, whichever is higher. So for developers who, for one reason or the other, choose to import cement, or if our local supply can't meet demand and we have to import, then price of cement goes up. And again, just to ring fence local industries, we have seen excise duty being introduced on furniture, on imported furniture. So those who are in construction and you have to fit out houses, or even if you're doing it for your own sake and you have to import furniture, now it will be cleared with excise duty. And of course, the conversation around excise duty is also an interesting one, because previously excise duty was a tax on, or excise duty as we understand it is a tax on certain consumptions that are considered either luxurious or harmful. But we have seen excise duty just progressively over the years translating into a consumer tax like VAT, where we can choose to import excise duty on anything and everything, goods and services alike, just again, I think as part of revenue collection measures. So we have excise duty again on paints and varnish, so that will also impact the pricing of units and houses and all that if you are constructing, because if we import anything, paints, varnish, or even a component that is used to make paint or varnish, then there's excise duty to it. Again, as I mentioned earlier, we have seen what we call export and investment promotion levy. So that has been imposed on certain items of construction. So we have seen it on clinker, which is a core product of cement. It attracts export and investment promotion levy, which really is a tax that you're taxed if you import instead of using what is locally available. Buy Kenya, build Kenya. So if you choose to import that, it has. So raw materials of steel rods, bars, those also attract export promotion levy, and we know how integral steel is in construction. So if our steel industries, industrial area import semi-finished steel rods and steel bars in making their final steel product, then there's an import levy, which we are calling export and promotion levy, at 17.5% on the raw material or the semi-finished steel rods and bars. So that just again translates to high cost of production for the steel rods and bars. We have export promotion levy on certain packaging materials like sacks, bags, and craft paper. It might also affect the construction industry, and I think ultimately VAT on fuel. That just changes the dynamics. It's 8%, but it just changes the dynamics on the cost of production across the entire supply chain. So then that just means that it's not gonna be easy. Tough times ahead. Tough times ahead. And I'm reminded to believe in the adage that it's darkest before dawn. So maybe things will improve.
Okay. Maybe to just recognize a few more people who've joined us. Vicky Odhiambo, Evans Musomi, thank you all for joining us. Godfrey Ngunyi is saying that he's watching us from Murang'a. Karibu sana. FJ Kithuka Kivuli joining us from Kitui. Karibu sana. Cyrus is saying quite interesting and relevant. Thank you. Thank you, Ben Kilonzo, Victor Mutua. I think my next question would be, so it looks like it's all gloomy. So they've gotten into my pocket. They're taking a lot of my income out now. I think to the tunes of almost 2% of what I would be earning as my net pay. Now when we look at real estate and in terms of production cost, the cost seems to it will just balloon with time. So is all hope lost? Like, is there any light? Is there anything good about what is happening? You know, I think that would be my next question. So for me as a real estate investor, what does it look like for me? Is there something good coming? Is it all lost? You know, so.
Okay. So the Finance Act came with some goodies and some areas and some industries and sectors that you can say they were hardly hit. As part of also just even compliance from a real estate perspective, before we go into how things look in the future and whether there's any good news, some of the administrative and procedural compliance that the Finance Act has imposed is what we call compliance with e-Teams. And again, that affects how, you know, players in the real estate market will look like, and how e-Teams work. And now that has been properly legislated in our VAT Act, in our Income Tax Act, and in our Tax Procedures Act. So the KRA introduced what we call tax invoice management system, which was supposed to seal the VAT loophole, to seal the loophole around VAT collection and VAT administration, because we've had a lot of what we call missing trader fraud, where people manufacture and sell invoices, or people claim fictitious invoices, and all that. And now with the advent of technology, when we rolled out iTax, we had what we call VAT auto assessments, where iTax would just automatically match VAT supply and VAT consumption, like input and output would be matched automatically from the system. Now we have what you call Teams, and from sometime last year, the deadline kept being pushed until we had a deadline of November of last year, where the expectation was that every VAT registered person would have migrated to Teams and issue Teams compliant invoice. In the real estate sector, I think that is very integral, because you are dealing with a wide range of suppliers. You are dealing with so many suppliers, from, you know, your basic things like sand, stones, ballast, all those things, to fine finished products of white marbled tiles and all that. And now the requirement is, if anyone is offering a taxable supply, they need to be compliant and be on Teams. So, and from an income tax perspective as a business, then you can't claim expenses if those expenses were not generated on Teams. So even for you as a developer, then, and any other person in the real estate space, we need to ask now the sand trucks at Mlolongo to give us receipts that are e-Teams compliant. So it's a difficult place to be, because we all know how and appreciate how the dynamics of the construction sector play out, but it is what it is from a legal perspective, and that's what the law expects.
I think when I think about the whole e-Teams conversation, I'm just worried about the SMEs that we have within the economy, those people who are not what is it called? They're not technology savvy, like they're not using technology to move their businesses forward. You know, your common mwananchi who would draft an invoice with a pen and paper, you know, something like that. And I'm just like, this is gonna be tedious for everyone. And it's part of the submissions that we were highlighting to the National Assembly when we are in the bill making process, that it's an odious task to expect that everyone is on Teams, because of the reality on the ground. I mean, the Jua Kali sector, most of them will be affected, because as a corporate, then you can't do business with them because they are not on Teams, because it affects your bottom line. You can't claim an expense that was not Teams compliant. So again, it just affects how things work in that space. So another thing before we go into what you can call the good news from a real estate perspective, is there have been a couple of changes also in the treatment of capital gains tax, which is a real estate tax, and we should mention in this platform, so how capital gains tax work is that you have
you dispose of property, and then when you make a gain, you're supposed to pay taxes on that gain.
On that gain, yeah.
Yes. So how it is now, or how it was before the Finance Act, is we only consider gains on properties that are situated in Kenya. So property from a capital gains perspective is shares and immovable property that is situated in Kenya. So if you're disposing of shares in a Kenyan company, then capital gains falls due. If it's land, if it's building, capital gains tax falls due. Immovable property only. So again, just to also stretch its nets wider and fish more, the Finance Act has introduced what we are calling indirect CGT, where if you dispose of your interests, if you dispose of say shares or outside the country, offshore, and the underlying value of that property, say if it's a company, the underlying value that the company holds is property in Kenya. So if the underlying value is more than 20% situated in Kenya, then capital gains tax will fall due. So this just targets the sophisticated offshore structures where you structure for tax efficiency and you set up your offshore activities. You set up your activities offshore. So if you make a disposal offshore, then it will still attract capital gains tax here in Kenya. Or if the transferor, the alienator, controls more than 20% of the shares in the Kenyan company, then it will attract capital gains tax. From an administrative perspective, nothing much has changed. It is still what it is. It is still 15%, and the computation has not also changed. So having said all that, then as part of extending an olive branch to this real estate conversation, there was some good news that the monthly rental residential income tax, what we famously refer to as MRI, has reduced from 10% to now 7.5%. And again, in our last webinar and over time, I think there have been a lot of questions around MRI. I hope most of us here are aware how to compute it. But just to quickly touch on it, so MRI is monthly residential or rental income tax. So it is a tax that is payable from earnings from residential units or residential houses. So if you're an investor with Savo and you earn rental unit, then you fall within the monthly residential bracket. It has a threshold of 288,000 a year to 15 million. So anything above that, between that bracket, would be subject to MRI. If you earn more than 15 million, then you fall under the what you call corporation tax. It's computed on your gross rental income. So if your rent with Savo is say 30,000, we do not deduct the expenses. The MRI is supposed to be 10% of 30,000, which is 3,000. It is payable to the KRA by the 20th on iTax. So it doesn't require a return to be filed. You just generate a payment slip and pay it. And it does not require a registration obligation, so you don't have to register for MRI. It's a payment obligation which is automatically on iTax. You just go and select income tax, then select monthly rental income tax, and put in your rental yield, your rental income, and then it will compute the tax and you generate a PRN and pay. So there was a lot of discussion sometime towards the end of last year and even this year, where KRA issued a public notice saying they're doing mapping. They're doing zoning and mapping, and I'm sure most of you saw that. Where even KRA said our officers will come identified in a certain manner, you know, no open, you know, they'll be dressed, they'll identify themselves, for you to give data of who your landlord is. So KRA has been mapping Nairobi in terms of identifying and locating landlords so that they go after landlords for MRI. And that process has been ongoing. Another tool that they aggressively use is meters. So if I Wangoi Karuga has 5 electricity meters registered under my name, honestly, I cannot possibly own 5 residential houses. So it probably means that I'm a landlord somewhere. So they will work along other government agencies like Kenya Power, Nairobi Water, to just collect that data. And they have been collecting a lot of data in that regard. So just to try and catch up on landlords. And I think to just entice us more to comply and make it easier is it was reduced from 10% as it currently is. It will go down to 7.5 effective 1st of January 2024.
Okay.
Yeah, so at least some good news in the real estate space.
News. Hey.
Not all gloom and doom. And also from an administrative perspective, the law allows the KRA to appoint what we call withholding agents. So in this Finance Act, something was introduced called withholding property agents. So if you are a company that is licensed or you are operating as an agent to collect, rent and administer property on behalf of the landlord, the commissioner can appoint you as a withholding property agent. And it's not an automatic obligation, it's on appointment basis. And if you're appointed, then you are expected to, there are certain obligations that come with it. So the law requires that you will withhold that rent, that you will withhold a certain percentage of tax and remit to KRA in advance on behalf of the landlord. And how withholding mechanism works is your taxes that have been, taxes that you're supposed to pay, but someone else withholds, as the name suggests, and remits to the Revenue Authority on your behalf. And what that does is automatically the Revenue Authority is aware that someone somewhere has made that income. And so they will come after you for the balance.
For the balance,
So for property agents, if appointed, then the law requires that at the moment they withhold 7.5% of MRI. So the way MRI works, we've said it's now 10% on gross. So if they withhold 7.5, then it means KRA expects you to pay 2.5 by the due date. And the requirements for compliance with respect to that withholding tax for MRI and all other withholding tax in this new dispensation of the Finance Act is that withholding tax is payable within 5 working days from deduction. So previously withholding tax was paid by the 20th of the following month after deducting. So for deductions that we made, or for payments that we made in July, and we deducted withholding tax, we were expected to remit by 20th of August. In the dispensation of the Finance Act 2023, payments should be made within 5 working days. So you can just see how the role of tax administration now has shifted to taxpayers. And the way I initially alluded to the fact that pesa ya KRA hailali nje. So within 5 working days, and party that some companies might be appointed as property withholding tax agents. And if that's the case, then if, for instance, Savo that manages properties on behalf of investors, then they will be deducting and remitting on behalf of the investor, and then we remit the difference. Come 1st January, when the rate is reduced to 7.5, then that, because the rate 7, and I will not a lot of teething now how 0.5, do I get a certificate? Is there, the law says that the property agent should file a return because they need to capture my details so that it shows from my PIN or against my PIN they have deducted and remitted. So we have not seen the return on iTax yet. The taxes ideally should be collected from 1st of July. So it's end month, or we've just, you know, most people pay their rent by the 5th, or by the 10th for some. So property agents who have, say, been appointed, is the return already in place? We've not seen one on iTax yet. So there's a lot of, again, back-end processes that the Revenue Authority needs to do to just ensure that these taxes are rolled out seamlessly. A couple of questions.
So for example, let me give an example of Savo and the investors that we have. So I, as Karen, I have invested in Savo, but I have also invested in other real estate companies. How does Savo know that I am within threshold so that they can know they need to remit it?
Okay, so so how does Savo know that they're within threshold?
That the investor is within threshold. So the bonds for MRI are, so you'd be earning 24,000 a month, yes. Up to the 15M per year, So if that's the case, and say for example, probably I have one unit within Savo, that's a studio that probably gives me, give or take 12K as gross rent, and then I have invested in another real estate company, which gives me another 12K. Savo only knows about 12. They don't know about this other 12. So if Savo is appointed as an agent and they have to withhold this amount, what happens?
So for the real estate property agent, number one, the Act didn't give a threshold. So for that withholding tax, there's no threshold. So
it's for everyone.
For ordinarily, for withholding tax, how it works, like, you know, your normal consultancy, professional fees, withholding tax, it's also 24,000. So even this year, when withholding tax was introduced on sales, marketing, and promotion, so we also have now withholding tax on sales, marketing, promotion activities. The Act did not give a threshold, so the expectation is again 24,000. But because MRI is couched separately under the Income Tax Act, then we will rely on the threshold for MRI. So if Savo is appointed as a withholding tax agent, and I own a studio and I earn 15,000, then Savo should not deduct and remit, because I'm below the threshold for Savo. Again, Kenya operates a self-assessment regime, and even MRI is a self-assessment regime. It's for you to determine, for you to declare how much rental income you make from your rental properties, residential rental property. So then if Savo does not withhold and remit, the obligation to account for the tax still lies with me. And again, not everyone will be appointed as property withholding agents. So there are some that will be, because that's their core business. There are some that will not. So the obligation to account for tax will still be with me. And come January 2024, when the rates comes to 7.5, then that's what you're saying. We'll see how it pans out, because if Savo then deducts and remits 7.5 on my Savo unit, does it mean I'll be required to account for 7.5 on the other units that Savo is not aware? So, and how will it now be a return that I'll be filing, or it's just the normal payment slip for MRI? So again, we don't have answers for those questions now, but to answer your question is that Savo will only then remit on what they know of your unit based on the MRI threshold. I see someone online has asked whether it's 218 or 280 per year.
It's 288.
It's 288. So that translates to 24,000 a month.
Yes. I think Vincent Mutua is also asking, hey, what is the effect of remittance of MRI by the landlords or property owners who do not utilize any property managers? What is the effect on the remittance of MRI by landlords or property owners who do not utilize any property managers? So that's like the individuals themselves manage their properties.
So the obligation still remains on you, because it's a self-assessment. So before the property withholding tax agent for property agents was introduced, ordinarily as a landlord or an investor with units in residential property, you are expected to account for MRI every month if your unit, if you receive the income. So if your unit is vacant, you have nothing to pay.
You have nothing to pay.
Yeah, so again, it's based on income and not just flat rate whether you have whether you have the income or not.
Yeah.
So it's a self-assessment regime. So if there's no property agent, then you, the landlord, the obligation lies with you.
Yeah.
And as I've mentioned, now the Revenue Authority has a lot of data on landlords. So compliance on MRI is just going to be heightened also. And we haven't seen audits, but they will start doing audits.
Yeah. I think Elizabeth Waithaka is asking, will the collector of these taxes, say Savo, on behalf of the investors, provide tax reports to the landlord? I think that's what you're talking about. Will they be issued with the certificates after I have remitted the 7.5 on their behalf? Say I'm appointed an agent. Will they receive the certificates? I think that's what you said. Let's see how it pans out as we move into the future.
So most likely it will have a return form that will show the PIN of the unit owner or the landlord, and then maybe the total rent, and then now it computes the 7.5. And ideally on iTax, you should be able to issue me the certificate for even me to prove that someone else paid the way our typical withholding tax and withholding VAT works. If someone withholds tax on against your PIN from your income, or withholding VAT on the VAT they've charged, then it automatically issues the recipient with a certificate.
I think I see Ben Kilonzo is asking, with regard to MRI, is 7.5 of gross starting 1st of January 2024. Point to not. Kindly clarify if the gross is the amount that Savo remits to our bank accounts. I think I can answer that. No, the gross is the amount the resident pays every month. So if the unit is 13, you're probably receiving around 10,120. That's after the deductions of service charge and management fee. So MRI is on gross, whatever the resident is paying, not after the deductions, which are your cost, because management fee is a cost, service charge is a cost that you deduct from that rent, but the gross amount, you add back those costs. I think Beatrice Guy is saying very useful information. Tim Mwiga is saying very useful conversation. I think thank you all for joining us. Nick Njeru made a comment to say very soon the government will begin preparing the next year's 2023-2024 finance bill via BPS. Should we just brace ourselves? I think this is what we're talking about, circle of influence, circle of concern. I think you just plan for it because it's going to happen. I mean, she said the only thing that is sure about life is taxes and debt. I think there's a question here by Evans Musomi asking, how might Savo and other real estate companies benefit from the proposed affordable housing scheme?
Very interesting question, Evans. Do you want to take that or I take it?
You can take it.
So, well, you will remember with the previous government, this affordable housing conversation is not new. So it was also there in the previous government, and I think it was really fought. It was shelved, and the private sector was saying that the role of the government is government. The government should not be the role of doing business. Leave the business to the private sector, and even when affordable housing levy was introduced in the finance bill, most of the comments and submissions from the public was that let the government consider ways of partnering with the private sector in building these houses, because the private sector is, number one, tried and tested. The private sector, that's their core business. They can influence a lot of things around construction. And we all remember P.S. Hinga having a hard time defending affordable housing to the public. and the narrative came out as though the government is not only wanting to provide houses, they want to create jobs. And the question is our problem a job creation problem or a housing problem or even a food problem?
A food problem,
So if you followed the news keenly, you have seen the kind of heated debate around affordable housing. and part of our submission to Parliament also was then allow the private sector to develop, because we have companies like Tsavo that have been, you know, tried, tested and delivered on affordable housing. And probably what we need to consider as a government is affordable financing, so that people, and we can say the right people are accorded these houses, because we have also seen many projects with the national housing around affordable housing, and I leave it to you to go and find out what has happened to those projects. So you're right, Evans, that it's an area the government could consider and explore, but we leave it at that for now.
I think a question that's asked in almost every webinar we talk about MRI, what happens to anyone earning rental income of below 24,000? Maybe we can clarify that. Yeah.
So what normally happens is the Act will provide annual bans. You will also notice if you go to PAYE, the Act has provided annual bans. It does not provide monthly bans, incidentally. So then it leaves us to compute then what is the monthly obligation, for argument's sake, PAYE, for me to deduct and remit PAYE, because I'm paid monthly. So some organizations will give you a contract and say your annual salary will be 2 million. But you see, they can't levy PAYE on 2 million because they'll pay you that 2 million per month for it to sum up to 2 million. So that's the same kind of argument we've done with MRI. So the Act provides a threshold, which is an annual threshold of 288,000 to 15 million for MRI, and it's an annual threshold. And it says anyone who is also within that threshold, and for one reason or the other, maybe they feel computing for it monthly is too onerous and they are comfortable computing annually, they can apply and seek the Commissioner's consent to move into the annual bands, which gets them to the corporate bands. So then for MRI, because the Act provides the lowest threshold in an annual basis of 288 million, if I earn my rent monthly or if I earn it quarterly, I'll have to compute what is the quarterly rent based on per month. Then we are made to consider it per month. And that's why we arrived at the 24,000 threshold. And our interpretation has been that if per annual is 288, then per month it's 24. So if I'm below 24, I am outside the ambit of MRI. So I have no business remitting MRI. I have, you know, the way we say even for PAYE bands, it starts at 24,000. Anything below 24,000, you are not subject to PAYE. That's the same way we do for MRI. So anything below 24,000, we say you are outside the ambit of MRI and you are allowed to enjoy your money without paying taxes. But then I think for Tsavo, if you have more than 2 units, you've started getting into the MRI zone.
Yes. I think Sir Prestige is asking, also kindly inform us on how the percentage numbers differ from your investors who don't reside in Kenya. I think it's the same. The MRI percentages are the same.
Yes. So the MRI, I have to caution that it applies to a resident person. So the Act reads a resident person earning monthly rental income tax is subject to a tax called monthly residential rental income tax. And from a legal perspective and also from a tax perspective, resident is a very strictly defined term. So we can go into the technical of who a resident person is for tax purposes. And the first rule of thumb is, do you have a permanent home in Kenya? And as simple as it sounds, permanent home, it has been highly legislated of what a permanent home is. And we have so many case laws around what a permanent home is. So then we have a couple of tests that you have to meet to show you a tax resident. So for your investors, and we have also received a lot of these questions from your investors who are non-resident. So we have diaspora investors who have invested with Tsavo, but number one, we have to question. So the circumstances and the situations vary from one person to the other, because whether you have a permanent home or not is a very personal and unique situation from one person to the other. So even if you are diasporan and you've invested in Tsavo, so you're a non-resident, you live abroad, but you have a permanent home in Kenya, where when you come, you can reside in. Even you can, you have a home here in Kenya that you have leased to someone or rented. So when you come, you can kick them out and you move in. Or you have left a spouse here in Kenya, so when you come, you can go back to your permanent home. So those are some of the things that we look at in determining what a permanent home is. Then the MRI rate still applies to you. You could be non-resident, but if you are resident for tax purposes and there's a very strict test that you have to prove to show that you're resident, then it's still standard. It's 10% now, 7.5 come January. But if you squarely meet the test that you are not resident, then the tax liability shifts. You do not account for MRI, and then you move into what we call a 30% withholding tax bracket for non-resident. So ideally, your property agent, in this case Tsavo, is supposed to deduct 30% and remit to KRA. So for people who have met the test of non-residents. So before we jump into, before concluding whether you fall into the higher bracket, which is 30% for non-residents, or you are in the resident bracket, if you live abroad or outside Kenya, we have to interrogate your facts on a case-by-case basis to determine where you fall. So you would find, because if we don't prove, the tests are many and they're in layers. So if you don't prove that you have a resident home in Kenya, we go into the number of days test. So were you in Kenya in that particular income for at least 6 months, 183 days? Most likely, yes, you become resident. So the resident test applies to you, even if you live abroad, and so on and so forth.
So it's on a case-by-case basis, depending on whether you're resident on or non-resident. Cyrus is saying, thank you, Tsavo, for the appropriate and fast responses to the queries. I can see Omkuti Namolo asking, when the rent is inclusive of service charge, does the gross exclude the service charge amount? So I think for us here, we have a separate engagement with our investors, where the rent that the tenant pays into the account as rent, that rent is supposed to go to the investor. But before we remit the amount to the investor, we first deduct certain charges. So we would deduct their service charge and their management fee. All this has been in effort to ensure that this investment is as passive as possible, so that I'm not giving you your rent in full and then calling you again tomorrow to ask you, hey, you need to pay me this amount for service charge, you need to pay me this amount for management fee. So I deduct it before I pay you, so that whatever I pay you, then you know that that's what you're working with as the amount you will receive every month. So I think Omkuti, that's what we do for our investors, just to ensure that the investment is as passive as possible. I think I'll read one more comment. That's from Eva Omondi. Which body is regulating the withholding tax on property agents? How will we know the genuine ones from the appraising quacks?
Interesting question. So when you're appointed as an agent, so as the name agent suggests, is you are going to act on behalf of a principal or someone. So when you're appointed as an agent, then it means you're going to take up revenue administration procedures on behalf of KRA. That's what it means. So for persons or taxpayers appointed as agents, then the KRA communicates and issues them with a formal letter, actually. You have been appointed as a property tax withholding agent, effective this date. And it's a letter from KRA. So if you, as an investor, or if you are a landlord and there's a property agent managing your property on your behalf, and you realize that your rent has been deducted, the first thing to do is to seek for withholding agent confirmation from KRA. And now with iTax, you're even able to verify whether that person is properly appointed as an agent or not, you can actually check on iTax. So the first point of call will be to ask from the property agent for communication from KRA. And if you've interacted with KRA, then you sort of know how their letters look like, how their appointments. They normally come on iTax, so it will just look like a very, I'm not sure it will be a formal letter written to you as a taxpayer, but it will be an iTax generated notification. So if you've interacted with the iTax, you can tell which iTax notification is legit or not. That's number one. Number two, we expect that because the law requires that property agents file a return to show the landlords that they've deducted from and the amounts, then ideally should issue you the certificate. So if someone withholds from you and don't issue you the certificate, red flag. Automatically. A certificate should come to your iTax account. The third thing would be, if they're withholding from you, they should have your PIN. If they withhold and they don't have your PIN, then that money is lost, my friend. So you need to know that they withhold against your PIN so that you can tie those funds that have been withheld, because it's your taxes, against your PIN. So you have to make sure that your property agent then has your PIN number for them to withhold against your name and PIN.
Okay, I think that sums it up. I think for the questions in the comment section, I'd like to thank everyone who's been with us throughout the whole hour that you've been here through the session. I hope you have learned something. I hope there's been information that you can take home and implement. I think for me, even as we close, I think we began talking about habit number one of highly effective people and talking about the habit of choice. When I look at things that you can influence, things that are within your circle of influence, I think for me, those are things like controlling your expenses and learning how to live lean, so that even if your disposable income is being reduced, then your investment journey is not being affected because you're taking care of it by reducing the amount of expenses that you have. I think part of planning is also just taking the 20-mile march, realizing that what I could do a month ago, I probably will not be able to do in this coming month or in the next 6 months with all these changes. I think that foresight helps you plan better, helps you make commitments that then you can keep, so that you don't end up punishing yourself because you did not do it again. So I think we're all a product of our own choices, and it matters how we plan out for these things, because then again, there are things we really can't control, as we said at the beginning. I think I'd like to say thank you for joining us. I hope we can do this again and give more information on taxes and how people can plan their finances better from this perspective. It's interesting. 7.5% for MRI on rental as rental tax. That's almost the cheapest on any investment, like any investment platform you would choose to invest in. So I think for me, let's keep building our wealth. Let's keep building generational wealth through real estate. And keep up. I hope to see you all again. I think even as we close our webinar for tonight, on the 31st of July, Savo turned 8 years. 8 years full of massive growth, full of getting to know each and every one of you. Now at almost 3,500 investors, we are running numbers of over 2,500 residents. We're building strong communities, and I think all that is because of all of you as our investors, and we are very, very grateful that you chose to walk this journey with us. I think without the first 23 who worked with us in Liza, I don't think we would have been here. So I think, and that marks the end of our webinar, and see you next time.
Owning your first apartment in Nairobi has never been easier. It's simple. With zero deposit and 0% interest rate, you can pay as little as 30,000 per month for up to 5 years. Just divide the price by the number of months you want to pay. Visit www.savo.ke to learn more.
What is the boldest thing that I have done? Coming from a tech space where there is literally no background, whatever comes along, you just adopt it just to see what's happening. WhatsApp na IG pekee na sisi hapa. But moving from that space now into implementing tech solutions within the company, within Tsavo, now things like internal processes, just making sure things run smoothly within that space. It was a huge leap, one that I don't know if I am enjoying or regretting. Sometimes when the adrenaline gets too high, you can't differentiate. But it's something I enjoy. And that is the boldest step that I have taken, aside from moving out of my mother's house. Yeah. My name is Henjoka, and we are the bold who changed the world.
They say that the youth are the future, but we believe that the youth are the present.
Change will not come if we wait for some other person or some other time. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the change that we seek.
Join a community of the change makers, the innovators, the visionaries who dare to dream big and make it happen. They are the ones who will shape the future, who will challenge the norms, and who will create a better world for us all. Those who dare to dream big and make it happen. Click on the banner to join the movement today.